Alright, y'all, let's talk about the Janet Jackson documentary. Y'all ready? It's lit.
I came to vibe, you came to function, just do that, baby. Don't worry about nothing, no.
What's good, y'all? It's your boy Bright here, the R&B kid. Welcome back to the episode of On the Bright Side TV. How you doing? Hope you're doing very well. Listen, y'all, I'm excited to get back into the swing of things with YouTube. If you haven't already checked my videos on my best and favorite albums of 2021, go check out those videos. Hope you enjoyed them. But for now, with this video, to get back into the swing of what's going on this year, I definitely had to get off my video for the Janet Jackson doc, which came out last weekend on Lifetime and A&E. Shout out to Lifetime and to A&E. And shout out to one of my faves in this thing called music, Miss Janet Jackson. Miss Jackson, if you're nasty. My fellow Taurus sister, my Taurus queen, Janet Jackson, queen of everything music. Even before this doc, I felt that way. Most of y'all probably should have if you've been following me for a while, but if you haven't, if you're new to my channel or whatever, I'm a huge Janet Jackson fan. She's always one of my favorites in music and the R&B world and the pop world, just in music in general. Since I've been a young kid, I've always loved her. I've been following her for a long time, and she's definitely one of my favorites when it comes to just all-around entertainers, when it comes to artists who have catalogs, when it comes to artists who just gave us moments and really inspired and really became a blueprint for, for artists and other generations to follow. Janet Jackson has always been one of my favorites, as I'm pretty sure, been a lot of yours as well, for good reason, because she's the queen of everything that she touches. So I was so excited when she announced this documentary last year. I was so hyped and I was ready for it. So I definitely made sure I caught it when it came out last weekend. I watched both nights, the 4-hour event that it was. Listen, y'all, from last weekend up until like a few days ago, the whole timeline, my whole TL was just Janet Jackson, Janet Jackson, Janet Jackson. And I was not mad because my girl has deserved this moment for so long. The world has always loved Janet, especially before the Super Bowl. The world always loved Janet, but I think after the Super Bowl and for many years, a lot of people quietly loved Janet and still did. But obviously because of that incident, things just got derailed with her career and things were slow for a while with her in terms of just like public love and admiration and just giving her flowers. But thankfully, in the past few years, after the State of the World tour, her getting inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, her having her baby, and just kind of us realizing how stupid that moment in her career was and how stupid that whole media debacle was, we have finally, as a society, been giving Janet Jackson the love and respect that she deserves for being the straight up blueprint for all these artists that have followed after her, just being one of the best people to ever touch the music industry in all areas when it comes to, dancing, singing, performance, acting, making album after album, making classic album after classic album after classic album, hit after hit, just, brand deals. Like, Janet Jackson was really like the architect and the blueprint for so many things in this entertainment industry, and she's always been one of my favorites. And like I said, I'm just happy that she finally got this moment to be able to tell her story from her perspective and really share her story with the world through her, through her narrative, which I'm just happy she got the moment to do, because I feel like before now, like she said in the documentary, so many other things have been released, so many other things have been made about her life and speculation around her life, but she's never been able to really just tell the full story of her life, at least what she wanted to share with us from her eyes. And I'm just glad she got this moment to do it. I'm glad they took their time to just film over the past couple of years and really get this together. I do have some criticisms for the doc, which I'll share later. I do have a lot of criticisms, but for the most part, I thought it was a great doc. I thought it was just a great moment for her career, a great moment for us to finally, like I said, give that respect and love back to her. Man, the whole timeline being Janet Jackson is so crazy to me, because for so long, my girl was just like not giving the love and respect she deserved for so long because of the Super Bowl incident and some other things. But I'm glad now that the world is finally like, nah, Janet Jackson has always been that one. She's still that one, and she will always be that one until she decides that she wants to hang up the mic, because she's that one. Like, she's that one. Michael is that one. There's so many people who are that one, but Janet Jackson was one of those ones, you know what I'm saying? So I'm so happy we're giving her this moment. It's been so long overdue and so deserved, so I'm happy you got it. And the doc was amazing. So let's get into it. If you haven't watched it, I'm just gonna go quickly through some things that happened in the doc. Just go through, all the things that I saw that I want to mention. And then after that, I'll give you my overall thoughts on the doc, as well as some criticisms. So yeah, man, let's get into it. Y'all ready? Let's go. Alright, so part one started off with Janet revisiting Gary, Indiana, her hometown where her and all her brothers and her mom and her dad grew up, which was, I think, a beautiful way to start the documentary. And she really explained her reasoning, like while she was driving to her old home, as to why she wanted to do her own doc, and she was like, listen, like, so many people have like given their, you know, accounts of my life from their eyes and all that, and that's cool, but I've never been given the chance to do my own doc from my own perspective, and I felt like it's time, like I just had to do it, and I was like, yes, Jenny, amen, because word, you know what I'm saying? And I really wanted to mention, can we talk about my girl like crying, like not even like what, like a few minutes in, and my girl was already crying, and I'm like, Jenny, we're not starting off the doc like this, like we're not gonna start off the documentary with you about to bawl your eyes out just because you're driving back home, like we're not allowed to do that, but honestly, I don't blame her. She was driving down the street, she saw a mural of her brothers on like a building. It was beautiful. It had pretty much the whole Jackson 5 there. And she like really was about to bawl her eyes out. I was like, Janet, no, don't cry, because I'm gonna cry too, you know what I'm saying? But I can't blame her. Like, can you imagine that moment after all these decades just seeing the work that you and your brothers have put in, and then seeing your hometown just give you, you know, give love to your family like that? That's amazing. So she started crying, and I was like, you know what I'm saying? But I love how she pointed out how all her brothers were like looking up and then Michael was looking forward. I thought that was such a great thing that she picked up, and that obviously was a big part of the mural. And I think a beautiful way to represent the Jackson 5 and how special Michael was, because Michael was always Michael. Like, everybody was looking up, but Michael was looking forward. I think that's so beautiful and so poetic. So I love how she pointed that out. Then after that, once her and Randy got to the house, she started talking about like her family pattern and how they all grew up. And I, for one, had no idea that the Jackson pattern was to have one girl, then 3 boys, then another girl, then 3 boys, and then another girl. I thought that was crazy. I never knew that before, and I thought that was so dope. Like, Joe and Catherine, y'all had a really interesting pattern going on. That is so beautiful. So I think they had Reby, she said at first, they had Reby. Then they had like, I think it was Jackie, Tito, and Jermaine, I think. And then LaToya. And then they had like Marlon, Michael, and Randy. And then they had Janet, which I think is so dope to have one girl, 3 boys. That is so cool. So shout out to the Jacksons. That was God right there. That's dope. That is so cool. And then they were talking about how they all grew up in that little house. He showed the house, and I was like, wow, that's crazy. Them 9 children, and Joe and Catherine were living all up in the house, I'm assuming trying to have peace, but definitely not having peace, because you saw the size of the house. That is so crazy. But yeah, I mean, we already knew that. But just to see the house in modern day, as small as it is, knowing that housed the 9 Jackson children and Joe and Catherine for all those years, it's just so crazy to imagine. But then again, a whole generation of black families were struggling to live in small houses with big families. Like, that was a very common thing, but it's just cool to see how the Jackson family like were able to come out of that and accomplish what they accomplished, man. But that house is so little, y'all. This shit's crazy. Imagine living on a street that had your name on it. That's crazy. They lived on Jackson Street, which I think is so dope. And can we just talk about it? I still think her and Randy's relationship is so cute still to this day. They were like the closest out of all her brothers. Like, she was the closest to Randy because they were the closest in age. And I feel like even still to this day, like, her and Randy are still so cute. It's like they're literally still like little brother and sister, but just grown as hell in like their 50s and 60s. But like, yeah, Janet and Randy are still so cute to this day. Is that just me? I think they're mad cute. And then for the next big bulk of the documentary, Janet pretty much talked about the ascension of the Jackson 5 and her and her brothers kind of, you know, getting into Motown and working with Berry Gordy and just becoming the Jackson 5 and going on tour and becoming famous, and just really their ascent as one of the biggest, like, you know, R&B pop groups of the 60s and 70s. So that was a big part of like part 1. Which I'll talk about this later. I personally appreciate it, but I kind of wish it wasn't as long and as fleshed out as it was, because this was supposed to be Janet's story. But I'll talk about that later. And also, can we talk about it? When Janet was talking about the Jacksons coming up and becoming the Jackson 5, I had no idea that Catherine was the one who did all them costumes, which is so amazing. Catherine Jackson, shout out to you, Queen. I had no idea that you were the one doing all those early Jackson 5 costumes. That is amazing. Like, the whole Jackson family, man, the whole family was just talented and determined and ambitious and resourceful. Like, the Jackson family, that was a special family, man. Catherine Jackson, you was doing all them costumes in the early days. Amazing. Amazing. Like, amazing. And then after that, Janet and Randy both spent time in the documentary kind of really fleshing out, I guess, Joe Jackson's life and his narrative, and I guess just really kind of fleshing out the narrative of him being abusive and toxic, which from their eyes, they pretty much were saying that he was, but it was done out of necessity and it was done out of love for us and all that. I'll talk about that more later, but that's pretty much what they spent the next part of the documentary talking about. And then after that, they talked about the family's move to Cali once the boys became really famous after Jackson 5. I think they moved to Encino, California, which we all know about from the Jackson 5 story. And Janet talked about kind of like being very young and having moved there when she was very young. and that kind of like defined her childhood. After that, the doc went into how the Jackson 5 and her sisters, pretty much all the children, started working in Hollywood and Vegas a lot more. So even when Janet was hella young, she started working in Vegas a lot. They had like a variety show that they were doing in Vegas, and I really love that part of the documentary because I didn't really realize how young Janet was when she really started working. Like, even though I know she was always part of the Jackson family, I never knew she was so young when she started working, like, for real. Like, I know she was in like some performances with her brothers, but I didn't realize that she was consistently working in Vegas, like, 5 days a week or whatever with her brothers, when she was hella young. And I just thought about that. Imagine being a young ass person, her brothers too, her older brothers and sisters, whatever, but especially being like one of the younger ones. Like, imagine being young as hell, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 or whatever, and having to like really be working, like professionally working as an entertainer, like on a Vegas show, like multiple days and nights a week. And you're a child, you can't even like have your life, you can't have your childhood. Her brothers too, they were working, like adults were working like multiple days a week, entertaining people in Vegas, and that was their life. And I just couldn't imagine that, like, for myself. And I just think it was good for Janet to remind the people like what her brothers were going through when they were hella young, like for real working, like from the time they were kids, just working, which they wanted. But like a part of that also must be like, damn, like you didn't have the child that you probably could have and should have had, and you didn't get to experience a lot of normal things because you were working. And I would say mine to greatness, but damn, so yeah. After that, Jenny went into her time getting to acting for the first time when she was on Good Times and on Fame, which was dope to see because you all know about that. After her first bout of acting, the doc went into her attempt to start her music career by way of her dad, who was the one that said, "I want you to sing." After hearing her recording a song in the studio, he was like, "Nah, Janet, it's now the time is yours. You up now. You gonna be the next one on family to have a music career, so you gonna sing." And even initially, though it started out as Joe's, I think I've heard this before, but I think it's interesting that even though Janet's career started out because her dad wanted her to sing, eventually became her passion. Eventually, she's the one that really made everything come together. But initially, she wanted to go to college and study like business and other stuff like that. I think she wanted to study like law and business, but her dad was like, "Nah, we're gonna put that on the back burner. You can do that later. I want you to perform. You're gonna be an artist, and let's get this thing going." Which I kind of knew about before, but I didn't realize like Janet really was just she didn't take music serious at first, and now she's like known as one of the greatest entertainers of all time. But when she was hella young, she didn't take music seriously as much as she took acting seriously. But then when she became a teenager and she was of age, Joe was like, "Nah, it's your time," which is interesting to know, But when she first came into the industry, the real fans know, not everybody knows, but the real fans know that Janet had 2 albums that came out before Control that were both flops. I've actually still to this day never heard either of those albums. Maybe I will one day because they'll probably have some gems, but those albums were flops. Janet Jackson and Dream Street, that came out in the early 80s. So the doc talked about that time in her life where she was trying to get going in music, but it didn't really happen at first, which is understandable because she didn't have a vision. She was kind of just going through the motions. There was no like vision for her. There was no clarity around how she was going to be an artist, how she was going to differentiate herself. And there was, her Joe was kind of going through the motions as well as her manager. So she had to restructure things and rethink about things. And that's what the next part of the documentary was. It talked about her firing Joe as her manager and just really kind of having to regroup and kind of rethink her strategy as an artist. And that's what led us into the Control era and her meeting Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis and just realizing that she wanted to fire Joe so she can kind of get new management, new ideas, a new energy behind her as an artist and her team. And then she found Jimmy and Terry, and then they started the Control album, and the rest was history. So that's what the next part of the documentary was. And that was like the moment where they really started showing Janet becoming the star. With the help of people like Paula Abdul and Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. And in the midst of the Control era, the doc also then went into her relationship with James DeBarge of the El DeBarge family, of the El DeBarge clan. I think they met around the time she was doing the Control album. And their relationship was beautiful at first. She literally loved him. They had great love for each other. But then it kind of ended up in a lot of toxicity. And I like how at this part of the documentary, she talks about how she noticed, with this being the beginning of it, that a lot of relationships throughout the rest of her life with men really centered on her being in a relationship with people who dealt with a lot of drug and substance abuse, which I'm glad that she kind of picked up and pointed out. And I think it's interesting that she noticed that trend in her life, because I think as a fellow Taurus, I can relate to having been in relationships where like there was a lot of like emotional or codependency issues, or like a lot of like brokenness that I was like really open to or like really thirsty to try and like help and heal that person. I think I've dealt that a lot in my life, so I can, you know, my choice is I got you. I know how we operate. We want to take care of people. We want to make people feel whole, so I got you. Like, I get it. But yeah, so she talked about James DeBarge for the next part of the documentary, and they wed secretly, like without her family knowing. They got married secretly. I think at a church somewhere. And apparently, the day her and James got married, like he left her at a hotel room like by herself like the rest of the day. And I'm like, James DeBarge, what the hell? Like, goddamn, bro. I think she said because he went to go do some drugs or some shit. I don't know. And I'm like, damn, James, that is so toxic. But that's what she was dealing with. So she spoke on her truth. But yeah, there was one scene in particular around this part where she was talking about really how the toxicity of her marriage to James, how she like realized it as the years went on, and how it just like broke her heart as to how, and at least in her eyes, she saw James as really taking advantage of someone who was extremely young and extremely vulnerable in the mind and in the heart, and really capitalizing on that. So that really broke my heart to see her really talk about how she like can see looking back now how he was really taking advantage of her because of how young and vulnerable she was. So that really broke my heart. She was like crying about it, and I was like, damn, Jen, that broke my heart. So I love that she was vulnerable with us in that moment. Love that part. Then after that, the doc talked about the alleged secret baby that Janet was accused of having all these years ago in the 80s. They thought it was James's baby, and then she cleared it up. Ricky was like, nah, that rumor was crazy. Like, I don't know why people like started that rumor. And then Debbie Allen was like, but where was the baby? Like, we didn't see no baby nowhere. She was on set every day. It wasn't no baby, wasn't no bump. You know, she was saying that she started taking birth control pills and she started gaining weight, and then people thought it was that. So yeah, it's just crazy how like that rumor kept up throughout for decades, and like she was like, that shit never happened, never had a baby. Why would I keep a father from his child? Like, why would I do that? And I was like, yeah, tell people, sis, like Jen would never do that. So I'm glad she cleared it up for y'all. Jenna never had a secret baby. She never had a secret baby. Let it go, y'all. You know, damn, Ace has her first baby. Deal with it. Then after this, the documentary went into her budding relationship with Renee Elizondo Jr., who became like the love of her life like the next decade, from like the late 80s into the late 90s. The documentary started going into that. And then it went into talking about pretty much like as we went into the late 80s into early 90s, as Janet's career started to blossom and really thrive, they started talking about how she was in this interesting space where she was having so much success, but at the same time, Michael was still the biggest thing on the planet. So like, especially when she was early on in the Control and the Rhythm Nation eras, when she was going on promo tours, like, you know, in America or overseas, Janet was dealing with a lot of reporters and interviewers constantly asking her and comparing her to Michael, to the point where like when she was in those eras, she barely, you know, she was having a lot of success, but she was still coming out of the shadow of Michael being the big superstar that he was at that time, you know. So Jenna was dealing with that. She was trying to find her footing as an artist when she was starting out. And then it was talking about her marriage to Renee. Renee and that goddamn camera. Can we talk about it? All the footage that Renee had, we're thankful for it, but goddamn, he was alone with that camera. Everywhere you go, Renee. You're doing great, sweetie. Keep going. You're doing great. You know what I'm saying? Like, Renee was annoyed with that camera. And then going back to Michael a little bit, I love how the documentary was talking about how even though there was always so much love between Janet and Michael for those years in the late 80s, early 90s, unfortunately because they both became like two of the big stars on the planet around the same time, and because both of their careers were thriving, they were both so busy, and because people, you know, on their camps were getting in between their way of them becoming close, they started to kind of diverge off, and they weren't as close as they were as kids when they started becoming superstars, which is definitely understandable. But I like how the documentary talked about how they just kind of were going their separate ways naturally as they became superstars. And not because there was a beef, but it's because they were both busy and they didn't really have time to foster their siblinghood as much as they did when they were younger. So the documentary talked about that a lot too. And next, the documentary got into the Rhythm Nation era. And one of my favorite scenes from this part of the documentary was Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis like laughing at her and roasting her in the studio when she wasn't able to like get a note right or like sing the part right how they wanted her to sing it. I can't remember what song it was for, but that shit had me dying. I was laughing so hard. I was like, Janet being mad at Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis was so cute. She's like, you know what? I'm done, guys. I've had enough of it. I'm going home. You guys and your attitude. You know, I've had enough of it. I don't need this. I'm going home. I'm like, Janet. I'm like, Janet, if you don't sit your ass down and sing the song. I'm like, dude, you wasn't singing it right. Like, they were right. You wasn't singing it right. Like, just sing that shit, you know, sing it with some passion, with some vigor. You know what I'm saying? But Janet was young, but it was great to see that footage of of real, that's real shit, like artists working through songs, working through issues, working through, trying to find a note, trying to find the right melody, trying to find the right vibe, trying to find the right energy for a song in the studio. And sometimes artists have it, sometimes they don't. Like that's real life. It happens all the time. But it's cool to see someone like Janet having an off day and her producer just laughing at her and be like, nah, this ain't it, sis. Like, you ain't got it today. And her be like, I'm over it. I'm like, oh. Like, that shit was so funny. And that's one of my favorite scenes in the whole documentary. I loved it. Jimmy didn't care. He was like, and then she's like, Renee, look, let's go. I'm going home. Let's go. And then Renee's like, but what about the album? She's like, I don't know. It's not happening. We ain't gonna do it. It's not happening. Imagine if Janet gave up and we would have never had Rhythm Nation. If Janet had really said F this, we would have never had Rhythm Nation. So I'm glad she calmed down, got over it, and went back to them and they got the album done. You know what I mean? Because imagine, oh my God. But that's my stubborn Taurus sis. So listen, it is what it is. That's my Taurus sis. We stubborn than them all. You know what I'm saying? We stubborn, but it is what it is. Like, listen, Taurus gang, we stubborn. It is what it is, man. Then after that, the documentary went into the next era of her career with her moving into the very late 80s into the early 90s with her signing to Virgin after having finished up her album contract with A&M. She signed with Virgin for one of the biggest deals in the music industry ever. I forgot how much it was for. It was a crazy amount of money. And then she released the Janet album in '93. And she did Poetic Justice around the same time. So I love how they talked about that as well. I would have loved to see John Singleton talk about Janet. That would have been really nice. But unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years ago. But that would have been really nice to see John Singleton talk about Janet and the doc. But yeah, so they talked about Poetic Justice. Regina King was on there, talking about how, like, even though Janet would admit it, that she thought there was a little bit of attraction between her and Tupac, which I could definitely believe. You know what I'm saying? Come on, I could definitely believe that. Come on, I could definitely believe it. So that was cute. And shout out to Janet's, I think, career-defining performance in Poetic Justice for showing her range as an artist and as an entertainer. And really, I think that was like her first major role in a film was Poetic Justice. So that was a great moment in her career. So we talked about that, which I loved. And then they continued to kind of just talk about Renee's impact throughout the Janet era as well. Pretty much throughout the entire, like almost throughout the whole 90s decade. Like the next part of the documentary is talking about Renee's impact on Janet throughout that whole era of her career, and really as she was blossoming and really developing her sexuality as a woman and as an artist. They were talking about, and they're really showing how Renee was a big part of that. Like, Janet was doing her own thing, but Renee was a big part of that as well. And speaking of Renee, we can't forget the iconic Rolling Stone cover. Still to this day, one of Janet Jackson's most iconic and most dopest pictures. Became her album cover eventually. Obviously, amazing photo shoot. I knew those were Renee's hands. If you didn't know that, cool, but I always knew that those were Renee's hands. Shout out to Renee. He got the pleasure of really dating Janet Jackson for how many years? Shout out to him, man. Shout out to him. Even though things ended up in toxicity as well, which I'll talk about in a second. So after the Janet era began, they started talking about her failed Coca-Cola deal, I think which happened around '93, which I never knew about. So that was one of my favorite parts of the documentary in terms of giving me something new that I never knew about. I never knew that Janet Jackson had a Coca-Cola deal on the line at that time. Because, Michael had Pepsi. A lot of people, Beyonce, Pink, Britney Spears, they had Pepsi. A lot of artists had, like, these big brand deals back in the day. And I mean, still to this day, but I had no idea. Well, Pepsi and Coca were big ones back in the day. More so than they are today. But I had no idea that Janet had a Coke deal back in the day. That was amazing. But unfortunately, it fell through because as soon as they were about to sign the deal, the papers were ready, everything was ready to go. Around that same time, Michael's allegations came out around the same time, and that like stifled everything, and Coke decided to pull out of the deal, which I think is bullshit still to this day. But I'm not surprised when you think about white men being at the head of this corporation and then looking at this black woman attached to this black man who's accused of some pedophilia at that time, even though he was exonerated. I'm not surprised that they pulled out, but I still think that was some bitch shit, and Janet should have had that brand deal. Like, I really wonder how much her career would have soared even more in the 90s if she had had that Coke deal. So that's messed up. I had no idea that happened. I'm glad she revealed that. Coca-Cola, it wasn't that deep, yo. It wasn't that deep. That's a goddamn shame. It wasn't that deep. But yeah, the documentary pretty much talked about how the allegations against Michael Jackson in the early 90s affected Janet for a while, because even though she was having so much success musically, unfortunately, everywhere she would go, people would ask her about Michael, and people were kind of like, associating her with the mess on Michael's end because they were brother and sister, obviously, which is sad. But I didn't really, because I was a baby, but a lot of people lived through that, and a lot of people remember those times, and it's just sad to see how Janet had to take that just because Michael was her brother, and not because she had anything to do with it. That was hella sad, but that's how they do black women. So are we surprised? You know what I'm saying? But then after that, they showed this beautiful scene of her and Michael, I think in the fall of '93, in Michael Jackson's apartment in New York, writing Scream and trying to write it, trying to figure out how they wanted the record to come together. And that was one of my favorite moments in the whole doc. It was never before seen footage. Just seeing her and Michael just being brother and sister, just chilling in his apartment, writing Scream, singing it back and forth, like coming up with lyrics, coming up with ideas, coming up with melodies. Like that is footage that's not everyday footage that you can just tap into. That is special footage that I'm so glad that, I think it was Renee who filmed it. Shout out to Renee, even though he was annoying with the camera. That is beautiful footage that you don't see every day. And it was so cute to just see her and Michael just working together, because it didn't happen often. They were so busy that they pretty much never worked together on music besides Scream. And Scream, I didn't know Scream was written in '93, even though it didn't come out until the summer of '95, which is crazy. So yeah, so that scene was so beautiful, seeing her and Michael write that song together was amazing. My heart warmed when I saw that scene. Especially knowing that Michael was innocent, it's so cute to have seen how they wrote that song to really talk about what was going on around that time with their lives, being at the center of so much scrutiny in the media. And they made it into an amazing bop, you know what I'm saying? That's how you do it. And then after that, as we go into the rest of parts 3 and 4, they started talking, they pretty much quickly breezed through the Velvet Rope era and the All For You eras, and they talked about the dissolution of her and Renee's divorce. Things got sour in the late 90s and early 2000s, and then she divorced Renee around that time. And then, yeah, they went to the Velvet Rope and All For You eras, and how in the All For You era she became really happy again, things were better. The allegations around Michael had died down. Things were really coming up for a little while around that time. And then after that, obviously, we went into the next era of her career with the Super Bowl and how things went left with that, even though it was an accident. And I'll go into that a little bit more later. And then after the Super Bowl happened and her career just went dead because of that incident, they talked about how she tried to pick up the pieces around that time in the mid to late 2000s, and how Tyler Perry, gave her the film roles in Why Did I Get Married and Why Did I Get Married Too, which I loved in those films. We talk about the fact that like black people held Janet down during that dark time in her life. While the whites and the powers that be canceled her, like black people, we held her down. Like the BET Awards, like black creatives, black artists, producers, directors, we held her down during that time. We did that because the whites were not going to do it. No shade. The whites were not going to do it. So we held her down during that time. So shout out to Tyler Perry, and shout out to her continuing her acting career in the Why Did I Get Married film series. And then after that, they talked about Michael's death in 2009 and that effect on her. Even though around the time Michael died, like they were on good terms, they were cool, they weren't seeing each other all the time because they were so busy. But thankfully, Janet said that the last time she saw him, it was love. She told him she loved him, and she got to see him like happy and laughing and smiling. So that was great. That was her last memory of him. But obviously, Michael's death was like one of the most tragic moments of her life. So they talked about that. That was a tragic moment for her. And after Michael's death, they pretty much fast forwarded to like the 2010s. And her becoming a mom at like 50 in 2016 when she had Asa, and her balancing, especially around that time, how she was balancing becoming a new mom and also trying to have the State of the World tour. Like I think that was on like 2016, 2017, 2018. So yeah, she had Asa around that time, and then she had the State of the World tour, so she was balancing that. So all the footage was around that. So that was cool. And then after that, it talks about her induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which happened in 2019, I believe. And that was a great moment for her. I'm so glad that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame finally got it right and inducted our girl into their academy, because she should have been there. I can't remember what was her first year of eligibility, but yeah, she got inducted in 2019, so they showed that great moment. Shout out to Janelle Monáe for getting to, present to her. Even though it would have been cool to see like one of her contemporaries maybe do that for her, but I still love Janelle Monáe, so that was cool. That was a great moment for her. And then the doc pretty much ended with a lot of other, celebrities that we all know and love, that love her and know her, talk about like, just her resilience, her impact on the music industry and just on culture, and really just her greatness and what she's doing to the world and how she's still standing, and just people who love her just talk about her and all that stuff, and her brothers, her sisters. Tito gave her a lot of love in the doc too. Yeah, so that's pretty much how the doc ended. So yeah, that was, if I missed anything, let me know, but I pretty much think I got all the major points that happened in the doc. So now let me give you guys my overall thoughts on it. Alright y'all, so this is my overall thoughts on the documentary. I think overall I really loved the documentary. I loved watching it as a major Janet Jackson fan, as a stan of hers. I think for me, someone that knows a lot about her, I even still enjoyed it. I knew a lot of the stuff that was mentioned in the documentary, but I still felt like it was a great watch. I loved how they put it together. I love the people that were involved. I don't think it was like an out of this world, like out of the park perfection in terms of how they produced it and edited it, but I still think it was an amazing doc, and I think it had great foundation that I think it'll have so much good replay value for years to come. So I thought it was great. I think they handled really showing so many major moments of her life, but I do have some criticisms, so let me talk about them real quick, because I do have some issues that I had as a major fan that I think a lot of y'all probably share too. So let me go through them really quickly. The first thing I want to talk about is I really needed more details on the Super Bowl. And the only reason I say that is because even as a fan, even though I don't want that moment and that incident to be one of the most defining things about Janet Jackson's life, I don't want it to be. I still think for the purposes of the documentary, I wish we had more details and I wish they spent more time kind of fleshing out what happened with the Super Bowl. I'm not sure if Janet didn't want to like say whether or not it was an accident or whether or not it was a stunt gone wrong, or whatever it was. I'm not sure if Janet wanted to really go there, and she didn't have to maybe go there, but I really would have appreciated just more time spent on kind of just talking about what led up to it in terms of like the factors that led up to it, and also just the fallout. Like they kind of just quickly breezed through it. Like they didn't really make it seem as if this incident wasn't something that really killed her career for almost a decade. Pretty much, like for almost a decade, this one incident really killed her career, and they made it seem like it was just kind of some like flash in the pan moment that happened that was unfortunate, and then she was able to recover like the year after, and that's not what happened. So I kind of wish they really, not to really drudge up and to really just kind of, you know, talk about this again, but especially considering the Hulu doc, which I watched recently. If you haven't seen it, I think there's a cool documentary on Hulu. There's a whole documentary about the actual, you know, her and Justin Timberlake's incident at the Super Bowl in 2004 on Hulu that I watched, and I think it was great. So the only reason I say that I really wish they took more time to flesh it out in her doc is because the Hulu doc really went into detail about like all the specific things around that incident that kind of like makes sense as to why things happened the way they did. Like they really, I'm not gonna go into detail here, but they really fleshed it out, and I kind of wish, because that doc exists, I wish Janet Jackson kind of took a page from that doc and like did her own version of it. Like, okay, so y'all, right now, right here, this is what happened. Boom, this is what happened, then this happened, and this happened, and this is the fallout as well. Not just what happened, but also I really want her to talk about her thoughts and her opinions on the fallout that happened from that. Like the media blackout she was given by MTV, VH1, CBS, all these major media companies that blacked her out, radio. The media blackout that Janet had in the mid-2000s was so crazy and so vast that it's a shame that the documentary, I feel like, didn't really do a good job of really showing how significant of a blackout her career had at that time because of a freaking titty. And you know, like I really wish the documentary really, like they had people talk about it, like her Gil talked about it, like some people talked about it, but they didn't really flesh out how crazy it was. And I didn't really want it to be the focus of the documentary, but I wish they spent more time really, for someone who's not as familiar, like for the kids who are not as familiar with what happens, like I really wish they fleshed it out way more, because it really was one of the most defining moments of the 2000s in terms of media scandals by a major entertainer. And to this day, a lot of us look back and realize how stupid it was. So because of that, I wish they spent more time really fleshing out, I wish from her own lips, what happened, how things led up to what happened, and the fallout from her eyes. Like how she felt about her blackout, how she felt about Demeter Joe failing, and 20YO flopping, and Discipline barely flopping because of that incident. And her, you know, I wish she talked about how she, not only what happened and how it happened, but also how she felt about it. She did for a little bit, but she didn't really talk. I wish she like went in depth about it. You know what I'm saying? Like I really wish she would like bare her soul and talk about how it affected her, but how much she's risen from it. You know what I'm saying? That's just my perspective. But let me know if y'all agree or if y'all disagree. But I just think especially because that Hulu doc exists, I wish she took control of the narrative completely around the Super Bowl and didn't just have it be like a 5-10 minute part of the documentary and then they moved on. I wish it had been fleshed out way more in depth. Let me know if y'all agree, if y'all are fair to disagree. And let's just talk about it. In terms of Justin Timberlake's involvement in the Super Bowl, listen, y'all know I'm a fan of Justin Timberlake, so I'm not trying to be biased here, but listen, even if it's gonna be FJT to the end of time, no pun intended, for most of y'all. And I'm not mad, I completely get it. I sympathize with y'all and I completely understand. Cause I think what has been messed up with on JT's part is not so much what he actually did or his involvement in the actual incident. I think that's what's been blown out of proportion in my opinion. So I think that's the narrative that which can get fixed. It is really Justin's involvement in what actually happened. I feel like, especially once you watch the actual Hulu doc, it really was all an accident. It wasn't something that was planned. And if it was a stunt, then Janet has as much responsibility as Justin has, if it had been a stunt. But I think it was just an accident that went wrong, right? So in terms of the actual incident, I don't feel like Justin should have been held to the fire more so, or, you know, with Janet not having, you know, I don't like how we've done that. But I do think I completely agree with the fact that over the years, Justin Timberlake completely dropped the ball when it came to, as a white, cis, heterosexual man, like speaking up and speaking out about not only like being sorry for what happened, because that he did that, and now just talking about the fact that like it was messed up and we should move on. And you know, he said that time and time again when what's happened, but he never ever said like, y'all are doing this black woman wrong. Like he never was on that type of energy while it was going down. He stayed quiet, he put his nose to the ground, and he worked and he did his thing, and he continued to thrive. And we all helped him thrive. So a lot of us, you see, y'all talk all this shit now, but back in the day, y'all was loving Justin Timberlake. So I don't understand his energy now. But my thing is, I'm not mad at him for what actually happened, and I'm not mad at him for how he handled his part, because I think he did what he had to do. But I do think, I completely agree with people who have an issue with him not taking enough of an active role in defending Janet and speaking up for the absurd backlash that she got all these years later after the incident happened. I completely agree with that. So for me, I wish Janet would have talked about that more in the doc, like saying, hey, you said that if you and Justin are cool, if you have forgiven Justin, or if you are at peace with Justin's involvement in the event on your end, like Janet, cool, I'm cool with that. Like I love that for you. But my thing is, I really wish Janet, whether or not it was in the documentary, I just wish in real life or in the doc, I wish Janet would just talk more so about her thoughts around Justin's lack of defense and lack of speaking up and lack of regard for what she was going through at that time. You know, maybe he you know, supported her behind closed doors. We'll never know. Maybe, you know, maybe they were cool. Maybe maybe that was happening behind closed doors. But at least in the public eye, we never really got to see Justin defending Janet and really using his power as a powerful, at that time and still to today, powerful, you know, cishet white man that's, you know, attractive, has money, has fame, has clout. He never used all of that to really, you know, to really help, not help, because Janet didn't need his help, but really to make sure he was doing his damnedest to know that this incident that happened between him and this black woman, either we're both at fault for it or leave us both alone. Don't just leave me alone and I'm gonna be quiet about Janet, but equally be as loud and adamant about the world forgiving Janet and forgetting about the incident in terms of what, you know, what happened with Janet and how it went down, as much as we're talking about it in your regard. So that's where I stand with the whole Justin Timberlake thing. But Janet made it clear. She's like, listen, y'all, me and Justin are cool. I want you to move on. I moved on from it. Like, we're done with it. And I respect that. But at the same time, I feel like that's too simple of a narrative. And that's too simple of a clip that she just, you know, copy and pasted into the doc. I really wish Janet would have sat down and really like talk about it again real quick and say, hey, you know, like I said before, talk about what happened, and then really talk about how you felt from it, and also how you felt about Justin not being so loud as he should have been, and all. I just wish he talked about that more in depth, you know. But yeah, honestly, it's FJT for the rest of life for a lot of y'all, and I get it. But I think we need to chill out with the whole, you know, fuck Justin Timberlake narrative. I think we need to chill out a little bit, because when he drops his next album, y'all gonna love it. You know what I'm saying? And I just think, yeah, we can hold him to we can hold Justin Timberlake's feet to the fire for what he didn't do back in the day, but he's also apologized and also clearly recognized that he could have done better at that time. And he's obviously in a different place now as a much older, mature, wiser, better person, right? And we all make mistakes. We all have grown from a lot of bullshit in our past. So I don't like when we do that to people where it's like, you know, they weren't doing what they should have done at a certain moment in their life, and they've now grown past that and are way better now. And they've even acknowledged that they could have handled things better in the past, but it's like, no, I still like, fuck you for life. Like, I don't like that. because Justin Timberlake, we all love Justin Timberlake. He's cool. Like Justin Timberlake has not been out here trying to like fuck with nobody's life. Like he's not been out here trying to play with people. He just was being a young white person that didn't have to really, you know, be accountable. And we can say that that was messed up, and it was, and he has himself, but that doesn't mean we have to be on some fuck you for life energy in 2021, 2022, you know what I'm saying? But I get how y'all feel, so I'm not mad at how y'all feel, but that's just my opinion. I think we need to chill a little bit, and that's just me. But at the same time, for those of you who are mad, I get it. And also, one of my other major critiques of the doc is that I really feel like they really just rushed through and steamrolled through so many important parts of her career where maybe she wasn't as commercially successful, but I really would have loved for her team and people around her to talk about, and herself to talk about those moments, especially, like I said, the Damita Jo era, the 20YO era. I really feel like, I'm really mad that the doc didn't really touch on those eras that much. Like the doc didn't talk about the Damita Jo album, it didn't really talk about the 20YO album, and those to me were very critical albums in her career because they were great albums that didn't get the love and commercial success that they should have gotten because of what happened at the Super Bowl. And I really am mad that the doc didn't talk about that because I feel like that was a very important time in her life. So I really wish the doc didn't like speed, you know, pass through those albums, you know? And also not just because of the Super Bowl, but I also wish they talked about those albums musically, like how, you know, she put the Damita Jo album together musically, how she put the 20YO album, the Discipline album, like together musically. I wish she talked about that. And also not just those albums, but also all her albums. That's my other major critique of this documentary. Because really the fallout from the Super Bowl in terms of its effect on the Damita Jo album and the 20YO album really could have been a whole documentary within itself. So the fact that it didn't really get any type of love in her doc was like, damn, you know? That I really feel like, not just with the Damita Jo and the 20YO albums, but I really feel like with all her other albums, the documentary really didn't flesh out like her musical and creative process and her accomplishments, you know, on the charts and on, you know, her tour accomplishments. Like, especially, like, they touched on it a lot with the Control and the Rhythm Nation eras, but even with her 90s albums and her 2000s albums, like, they didn't really talk about her musical creative process. They didn't talk about her songwriting process enough. They didn't talk about her accomplishments on the charts. Like, this is a woman we're talking about who had, like, from 86 to, like, 2001, almost every song that My Girl put out as a single was hit the top 10. Like almost every song I think she put out around that time, like from the mid 80s to 2001, almost every song Janet put out hit the top 10. That's not something that we hear about every day. There's not a lot of artists that had that achievement where almost every song, every single you put up on an album hits the top 10 or the top 5. Janet had a run from 86 to 2001 that was insane. And they highlighted a little bit of that, but I just feel like they didn't highlight enough like the real success that Jenna was having on the charts, touring, you know, brand deals, just really being like this amazing superstar that really was almost on the level of Michael Jackson. Like, there was so much that was happening for Janet around that time in her career in terms of her having success musically as an artist that I feel like for, you know, parts 2 and 3, they really got through a lot of that, but I feel like they could have done a better job of really highlighting like the real success that Janet was having at the time, on par with Michael Jackson or Prince or Whitney Houston. They kind of made it seem like Janet was a star, but not someone who was like on top of the game, and she really was at that time. I really wish they just took more time in the documentary to really just highlight how, as a black woman, this woman was killing it in the music industry, like just killing it on all fronts. Every song she was releasing going to the top 10 or the top 5. You know, every music video she was dropping was an event. You know, just really being one of the top selling and most bankable artists in the music industry. I really feel like they talked about it, but they didn't really show it as much as I feel like as well as they could have shown it. Especially if we're talking the Janet era, the Velvet Rope era, they really highlighted the 80s a lot, but they didn't really highlight her dominance in the 90s and the early 2000s before the Super Bowl. Like, they didn't really highlight how she was doing music. I feel like I highlighted her behind the scenes life, but I really wish they would have highlighted more of her actual success as an artist, like her touring, you know, promoting her albums, creating them, the success she had with her songs. Like, I wish they just really went into more of that, you know what I'm saying? Let me know if you agree or disagree. And speaking of all of that, that relates to my next major criticism for this documentary, which is how I feel like this documentary really focused on, unfortunately focused so much so on Janet's relationships with men in her life instead of it being about her. At the end of the day, Janet's relationship with men was a very critical part of her life and a critical part of her story, so I'm not mad at that. The fact that these men were talked about in this documentary. But I really don't like, and I think it's messed up how the documentary focused. I really feel like it organized itself, especially like we're talking like parts 2 to 4. Part 1 not so much, but parts 2 to 4 focus so much on her relationships with men, to the point where I feel like the documentary was organized around that, instead of it being about Janet and her life, with men being a part of it but not being the focal point of it. Because to me, I feel like they focus so much of the documentary and her story and her childhood around her father and around her brothers, and then in her adult life they focus so much of her story and the documentary itself around the men she dated. And to me, obviously these men should have been incorporated in her story because duh, but they shouldn't have been the focus of her narrative, because this was supposed to be her story. And unfortunately, I feel like the filmmakers and Jenna herself had a chance with this documentary to really beautifully organize this documentary around her album eras and around things that were happening in her life that weren't just around about the men she was dating, and include the men in the story and weave them in there because they were part of it. They had the chance to do that, but instead they took the route of really making the men in her life the focus of her story and building around that. And to me, that was the really wrong route to take. And I understood why they took that route, but to me, it didn't make the documentary as amazing as it could have been. Because to me, if I was in charge of making a documentary, what I would have done is say, hey, listen, we're going to talk about Renee, we're going to talk about James, we're going to talk about your father, we're going to talk about your brothers, we're going to talk about all these men because they're part of the story. But we're going to organize this documentary in terms of how we're going to edit it and structure it. We're going to organize it around each of your album eras, because that is the best way to really organize a documentary for such a big superstar who had an amazing run for decades. Someone who, especially when you think about Janet, she's someone who didn't release an album every year. She gave you an album like every 3-4 years, which is perfect. So it allowed every album to have its own life, have its own special phase in her life. You could tell a picture of what era Janet was in by her hairstyle, how she looked. Because every album era gave you a different vibe, gave you a different look, gave you a different feel, and gave you a different side to Janet. So I feel like it would have been amazing for the documentary to have been, okay, first we got the Control era, then we're going to move to Rhythm Nation, then we're going to move to Janet, then we're going to move to Velvet Rope, then we're going to move to the 2000s and kind of maybe lump that into like, its own section, because those albums weren't as big as her 80s and 90s albums. And then we'll talk about the Unbreakable album. I really wish they really focused it around how she progressed in her life from album to album and from moment to moment, rather than from her father to her brothers to James to Renee to this man to that man. Like, I really wish we didn't do it like that. You know what I'm saying? I feel like Janet is such a special and dope woman that I don't like that I feel like so much of the documentary was focused around the men that are related to her or the men she was sleeping with, as opposed to what she was accomplishing in the music industry, which is really it should be the most important thing, because what she was accomplishing as an artist, creatively and commercially, we have not seen since. Like, come on. And I've been talking about, wanting more from the doc in terms of how they talked about her career and her evolution musically. But we also, and a big part of that to me is the diversity that Janet had within her catalog. I think that's something that wasn't even highlighted enough in the doc, which is also something that irked me, because Janet has one of the most, I think, prolific entertainers we've ever had, in terms of someone who has one of the most diverse catalogs musically and in terms of what she did with her music. A lot of people kind of stay in one lane for the most part. There are those few superstars we had that'll touch so many different arenas, and Jenna was one of those people. Her music had, sexy slow jams. We had the sexy up-tempo club bangers. We had the songs that were alternative and experimental and had some rock influence. We had the cute pop singles, and we had the political songs and the songs that were talking about real stuff like abuse and HIV and suicide and racism and just so the Velvet Rope album, all the things that she was talking about on that album, and having New Agenda on the Jenna album, and then all the stuff she was talking about in terms of political and political turmoil and strife and all the struggles that we're dealing with in our world, drugs and crime and everything that still goes on in our world on the Rhythm Nation album. While all these albums are talking about deep stuff or having cute bops and bangers in between, people don't talk enough about how powerfully diverse Janet's catalog is. And I would have loved for the doctor just touched on that, especially with the bigger albums. They're just talking about how she had songs that were pop, R&B, hip hop, alternative, different topics, different different tempos, different vibes, but she made them all fit onto these one beautiful bodies of work. And she had so many different ideas and so many different executions when it came to like videos and her tour performances, and I just wish we like really delved into that more. Like that was really something I wish we had more of, because there's so much to pick from, there's so much to discuss when you think about how prolific and how diverse Janet's musical and just cultural output was in so many different arenas, and on one album and in one era, the different types of messages and vibes and songs and styles and moments she gave us. Like there's so much to really dive into there. So it's like I really wish we got more of that. But at the same time, I can completely empathize, because there's only so much life you can stuff into 4 hours for someone who lived as vast and as expansive of a life that as Janet Jackson did. So this could have been like a whole 8-hour miniseries. It could have been maybe like a 16-hour miniseries, because Janet has lived so much life and accomplished so much. But yeah, that's just a little gripe I have. But at the same time, I can totally be empathetic to the fact that we only had 4 hours, so it is what it is. And not to be messy, y'all, but speaking about men in her life, I'm gonna talk about men that weren't included in the documentary. I want to talk about Bobby Brown, because I know it's alleged. I don't know if it's true or not, but Bobby Brown did allege in his own documentary, in his biopic that came out on BET a couple years ago, that was amazing as well. He pretty much showed in his documentary, in his biopic, that he was chopping Janet down, like I think around the Rhythm Nation era. So I don't know if that's true or not. It's alleged, according to Bobby Brown, it's alleged. But I would have loved to have seen Janet like quickly mention that, like, so his little thing, maybe Bobby Brown, we had a little thing back in the day, or where she said like, what, I know that Bobby Brown showed that we had this, sexual relationship in his biopic, but guess what, guys, it's not true. Whatever, like, I just wish she kind of mentioned it. She didn't have to, and I'm not surprised she didn't, but I really wish Janet would have mentioned that really quickly. That's just me, because Bobby Brown alleged this, so I would love to know if that was true or not. Bobby Brown be extra as hell, we know that, but if that was true, that's interesting right there. You know what I'm saying? That's interesting. But if it's not true, I would have loved for Janet to have been like, listen, y'all, that never happened. Bobby, I love him, but he's extra. End of story. Like, I wish you could clear that up a little bit, you know what I'm saying? And then also, we had no recollection, no mention, nowhere in the documentary of Wissam, her latest husband, I think her latest ex-husband, who was the father of Asa. None of us know nothing about that billionaire man. We know he's some big tycoon. I forgot what country he's from. But Janet didn't mention one lick of that man in the documentary. And there's probably a reason for that, because he probably like made her sign some forms where he said, you can't talk about me in your little movie. So your little project, you can't talk about me. He probably said, they probably had an arrangement where she couldn't say nothing about him, whatever. But I just wish that Janet would have just quickly mentioned, and also in the past couple years, I fell in love with this man. And not go into details, but just talk about how, how you met him, how you fell in love with him, how y'all got pregnant with Asa, like, your journey with that, and then talk about why things ended. Like, I don't think it has to be anything salacious or anything like messy. I just wish she talked about meeting with Sam and how they had Asa and how they fell apart. And, I just wish, like, her talking about all her other men, but then I talk about Wissam, I think was weird. It's like, Wissam not only is the father of your child, but also was your most recent husband in your life. So why did you talk about him? But maybe she wasn't allowed to, I don't know, because I know he has like I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. So yeah, that's I always wonder why I shouldn't talk about him at all, but there's probably a reason for it, so I'll let it go. And lastly, I'll talk about Renee. I just wanted to say really quickly, even though I think I respect Renee so much for what he did for her career, especially when we think about the Rhythm Nation era, the Janet era, the Velvet Rope era, I'm so thankful for what he did for her career in terms of being such an important creative collaborator for her. As you can see, he was helping with the choreo, the looks, directing videos, all this other stuff. Like, he was really an important creative collaborator for her around that time in her life, and I think that's amazing, and I respect him for that. But I think it's kind of corny how when they divorced, he was trying to mooch off her. I just, like, you saw that clip where he was like with his lawyer, and his lawyer was like, Renee has contributed so much to her career that he's deserved payment, or whatever they said. Like, I just thought that was corny. Like, my guy, like, don't try to mooch off Janet now when it was love for you. Like, if it was love, let it be love. And then Janet was pretty much saying too, like, one of her biggest fears and insecurities throughout her whole life, which I totally can understand and breaks my heart, but almost every big celebrity and entertainer has to deal with this, is not knowing who's there for you for real love and, you know, to really love you as a friend or as a romantic partner, who's there to really love you and be friends with you, and who is there because of, you know, your status, your last name, because you're Janet Jackson, because of people you know, because of, you know, Michael or whatever. Like, you a lot of times you can't tell who's there to love you for who you are, or who's there to love you because of who, or because of who you are. You know what I'm saying? As Janet Jackson. So I'm glad that Janet talks about that, and I really just wish that Renee had been a better man when they broke up. I thought it was corny how he tried to mooch off of her, but maybe that's just Janet's narrative. Maybe that's her perspective. I don't know, but you know, that's just my thoughts. Let me know what y'all think about that. Y'all think he was mooching off of her? Or y'all think he had every right to get his coin when they broke up? Let me know what y'all think. And I completely forgot to talk about Jermaine Dupri when I was talking about what happened in the doc as well. I completely forgot about that because Jermaine was a big part of the documentary in like parts 3 and 4. Listen, if no one's gonna say it, I'm gonna say it. Even though, you know, Jermaine and Janet ended because allegedly he had cheated, it was cool. They were both busy as hell, living in separate cities, you know, on separate ends of the country. Both fly, successful. I get it. But if no one's gonna say it, I'm gonna say it. I think Janet Jackson and Jermaine Dupri should get back together because I feel like the vibes would still be there if they got back together now. I feel like they'd be cool now. I feel like Janet was like, it looked to me like Janet was like her most happiest and at her most chill when she was with Jermaine. I don't know if y'all feel that, but I feel like that. I feel like they were a great match. You know what I'm saying? So I feel like he matched her fly in a lot of ways, and he was able to like be his own self while being you know, a celebrity and a big name himself, while being able to like, you know, be under the light of Janet Jackson, but he wasn't fazed by it. And I you know, I don't know, I just feel like even still to this day, I feel like they work out. If they can, you know, get past what happened in the past and the vibes are still there, I feel like they should try it out. Let me know what y'all think. I don't know if no one's gonna say it, I'm gonna say it. I feel like her and Jermaine should try it out again. I feel like the vibes will be there. I feel like they'll be right. And I feel like they can work out again. But yeah, Jermaine, not you laughing when they asked why you and Janet ended. You talking about, well, you know, dating Janet attracts more women, and listen, I was a man. I'm like, Jermaine, you can't be laughing about cheating on Janet Jackson. Like, not her in her own documentary, but it's all good though. Like, even she laughed about it too, so they cool. Like Janet laughed about it too, which is why I feel like they didn't really end on bad terms. I feel like Jermaine cheated, and they kind of were over, you know, having to like make it work with each other. But I feel like if they like were in the same city now, if they could like reinstigate those vibes, I feel like it will be dope. So let me know what y'all think about that, but I feel like that should happen. So yeah. And lastly, the last man I'll talk about obviously is Michael. I loved how the documentary talked about her and Michael kind of separating and not being as close to each other as the years went on, as they both became so successful. I just wanted to mention how sad it was to see her and Michael's relationship diminish over the years because of, you know, their success and because of people and the industry getting in the way. I think it's sad that they didn't collaborate more because they only have one song together, which I think is insane. Michael has one song with Janet, and Janet has one song. Thankfully, they did that song Scream, but if they didn't do Scream, they would have had no collaborations. And as brother and sister, it's just sad that they let the industry and people get in the way of them, as they were both killing it in the industry. But at the same time, it's definitely understandable. So, you know, it's at least like it wasn't beef, but it's just sad that, you know, even during the Scream video shoot, they were talking about how, like, you know, Michael's label and her label, you know, didn't want them like working together. Like they had them shooting on like, you know, separate times of the day. Like she'd shoot at night, he would shoot in the morning and stuff like that. Like they were trying to create this like competitive energy on the set of the Scream video. And I just think that's really sad and really corny because like that's a brother and sister. Like at the end of the day, while they were both, you know, competing as artists in the industry, they weren't actually competing because they loved each other. So it's like the fact that the industry was trying to pit them against each other and the people around them were trying to do the same thing. It's just so sad. But I'm glad they were able to kind of, I feel like they let it affect them because they grew apart in a way, but I'm also glad that even in the midst of that, there was always still love and that they never ever had a real beef. It was just the industry and their success and people getting in the way of them being as close as they used to be when they were kids. So it's sad to see that, but it is what it is. But at least I'm glad by the time Michael passed, they were on great terms and it was love. So at least I'm glad she got that. And one of the last things I want to talk about in the documentary that I thought was really important to talk about was obviously Joe Jackson's narrative and the way he was portrayed in the documentary. Joe Jackson, to me, is someone who I think his brilliance and his behavior and his personality and his tactics for how he raised his children in the 60s and 70s and beyond, I think it can't be stated enough how all of that was very much necessary for Michael and for Janet and the Jackson 5 and really the whole family to have succeeded and made their mark on the world in the way they did. That family would have never left Gary, Indiana. They would have never became the biggest musical family in the world if it wasn't for Joe's brilliance and for his determination and for his stern, need to be able to get them together, discipline them, and have them get it together at all times. That energy was necessary for them to achieve what they achieved. And I think even Randy said it multiple times. Janet said it. She said, listen, my dad, he disciplined us. He was tough at times. He did what he had to do. And Randy said it too, but we wouldn't have got what we did without him. Our mother saw our talent, she saw our brilliance, but it was our dad who was one who was able to help us put it into action and get us where we needed to go for us to make our dreams happen, which I think is facts, right? And I think that's accurate, but two things can be true at the same time. What I'm kind of annoyed with Janet and Randy, really the whole Jackson family, and really not just them, but really Black, and Happy Black History Month, but we gotta talk about it. And not just Black people, because I think, Asians, Latinx people, I think just people of color, we deal with this a lot, even white people. We all deal with, discipline, not all of us, a lot of us, especially in like Black, African, Caribbean households, we especially deal with it. We all deal with corporal punishment, getting beat, getting whoopings, all that stuff. We talk about that as a community. We've all grown up with that. I grew up with that. We all grew up with that, right? But I think it's okay for two things to be true. We can admit that Joe's behavior and the way he disciplined his kids was necessary for them to have success, and we can acknowledge that and appreciate that and respect that. But I really wish Janet and Randy throughout the documentary, and I just really wish the whole Jackson family for all these years could just say, listen, Joe did what he had to do and it got us where we are now, but that shit was toxic. It's almost like Janet and Randy were like not trying to admit that the way Joe raised them was toxic. Like, I think I appreciate when I have conversations with my friends who are Black, African American, African Caribbean descent, and we talk about the punishment we went through as kids and how we all got whooped and beat and all that stuff. And we knew, especially now as adults, we all knew it was our parents' way of getting us together, and it was our parents' way of trying to instill lessons within us. And we got that now. But we can still acknowledge that while that was the goal and that was the initiative and that was the aim, and it did what it had to do. And a lot of us are good now because of how we were punished back then, in terms of us being able to be respectful, and we got things together when we made mistakes as kids. While that's true, it doesn't mean we can't acknowledge the fact that our parents could have taken a much more strategic route and a less toxic route than they did. And I just wish Janet and Randy and the whole Jackson family would just, when we talk about Joe, we can say Joe, his brilliance and his personality and his tactics were necessary and they were useful and they were critical. We can say that, we can acknowledge that, and that's true. But we also need to just call a thing, call a spade, call a thing for what it is, and just say, listen, Joe was toxic. Even though that man has passed away, I get he's passed away, but just say, and maybe Janet's experience is different because she was the youngest child, so maybe she didn't get it as much as the older ones did. But I really wish even the older ones would just say, listen, Joe was something. He was something. He did a number on us, mentally, spiritually. I feel like he had those kids shook. Like, he really did. Like, if Joe says something, even Janet said it, she's like, if Joe says something, you were doing it. And that's toxic. Yeah, your father loves you. Yeah, your father did right by y'all in terms of getting out to where y'all need to go. But you shouldn't be afraid of your father. And you know what I'm saying? And I just feel like I wish Janet and all the Jackson kids would just say he was toxic, just acknowledge it, call it out for what it is, but at the same time still acknowledge that you love your father through all the bullshit, and just still say that, yeah, it was necessary for us to get to where we needed to go, and that's true. But don't act like, oh, Joe disciplined us and it was terrible, but we love him and it was necessary. Like, no, don't steamroll past the fact that shit has traumatized your entire lineage in some way. And fortunately, you guys have blessed the world with your talents because of it, and we're all thankful. But let's not act like y'all don't wish y'all grew up with a father who would have shown more love to y'all and who would have taken a different route. All of, not just Jackson, I mean, all of us. We all wish our parents would have taken a different route when it comes to, you know, disciplining and all that stuff. So I really wish we can continue to have more conversations about that and not just act like, oh, you know, we were disciplined and I'm thankful for it because it made me a stronger person. Like, yeah, okay, yeah, maybe, but also acknowledge that it was toxic and our parents could have done better because they could have. You know what I'm saying? Let me know if y'all think I'm buzzing, if y'all agree with you, but that's where I'm at with that. So I just wanted to talk about that real quick. All right, y'all, so those are my thoughts on the Janet Jackson documentary. I'll end off the video by talking about probably one of my top 3 favorite moments in the doc in terms of people who talk about Janet, and that was Questlove, who at the very end really explains what a lot of people don't really understand when it comes to why Janet Jackson is so amazing in terms of what she was able to accomplish in her career. Because unlike the average pop star who's came through from the 80s up until now, Janet Jackson had to go up against so many things that almost every pop star has not to deal with 1 or 2 of these things. Janet was, not only was she a woman in the music industry, but she came in at a time where women were really done wrong in terms of, you know, trying to do things on their own terms and trying to do things their own way and have their own voices being at the center of everything. Janet came into the industry as a woman, as a black woman, not just a white woman, but as a black woman. Come on. And then the third and final dagger, not only as a woman who was black, but she had to come into the industry as a Jackson. At the same time that her brother Michael, probably quintessentially, probably arguably the biggest star on the planet, was also having success at around the same time she was. She had to push through those 3 things just to prove herself and just to come into the door. Your favorite artist, your average pop star, your average entertainer did not deal with those 3 things. Some have been women, a lot have been black, very few have been a black woman that also was a Jackson and the sister of Michael Jackson. Imagine being the sister of Michael Jackson, the biggest artist in the world at that time, and also the Jackson 5, who a decade earlier was the biggest thing around, coming out of the shadow of the Jackson 5 and then Michael Jackson, trying to establish your own career, and you're trying to establish a career that is a dominant, male, white, heavy industry. And you are killing it. Hit after hit after hit, moment after moment after moment, blockbuster, classic album after blockbuster, classic album, movies, tours. You're killing it while being up against a machine that won't let you be Janet Jackson, because you are a black woman who's the younger sister of Michael. And that's that little sister of the Jackson 5. She pushed through all that to become who she was, and look at the career that she left behind that is still going up until now. Hopefully we'll get the Black Diamond album sometime in 2022. I'm hoping we'll get it soon. Amazing. So Janet Jackson, you are queen. You are one of my favorite artists in the world. You're one of my favorite people in the world. My fellow Taurus queen, my Taurus sister, I love you. Your documentary was amazing. I had my criticisms, which I mentioned, I had my criticisms, but besides those criticisms, I thought your documentary was great. I'm glad you gave us this peek into your life. Thank you for sharing this documentary with us. Thank you for sharing your story with us from your words and your eyes. It was everything. I loved it. And I'm looking forward to the next chapter of your life and your career coming up soon. I can't wait to see what's next. But for now, thank you for this. It was amazing. Thank you. Mwah. Alright y'all, so that's my video, that's the end of it. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you thought about my reviews down below. And let me know what you thought about the documentary. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you think it was okay? For you, what was missing? For you, what were some things you wish were different about it? Or what were things you loved about it? What were things you didn't like about it? Let me know your thoughts down below, okay? Appreciate it. If you haven't already, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe as well, okay? Thank you, I appreciate it. And like I always say, guys, live your best life, drink more water, stay woke if you're mad or sad, or listen to your favorite song to make you feel better, okay? Go listen to your favorite song. Alright, y'all, this has been your boy Bright, the R&B Kid. Thank you for watching. But for now, I'm signing off, baby. Bye, y'all. Peace.
I came to vibe, you came to function, just do that, baby. Don't worry about nothing, no, 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 no. I came to vibe, you came to function, just do that, baby. Don't worry about nothing, no, no, no. Relax just a little bit. You don't gotta worry, you can just